Welcome to today's Expert Talk Online. And tonight we've got a conversation about you build it, you run it. And we're going to be focusing on what that means, particularly for engineers and delivery leads. I'm Julia Bellis, and I'm a product manager at Equal Experts. I'm currently working on building pricing tools for holiday rental properties, and I'm here to introduce our speakers today. So chairing the conversation, we've got Steve Smith. Hey, Steve. Steve's a principal consultant at Equal Experts, and he's done You Build It, You Run It at 3 different companies. At his last client, he designed the You Build It, You Run It setup for 30 teams. And Steve's going to be talking to Erin O'Connor and Yassine Kofia about their experiences with You Build It, You Run It. Erin is an Equal Experts delivery lead who's enabled You Build It, You Run It teams to launch and operate their support models at 3 different clients. Her current team has recently transitioned from working hour support to 24/7 support, but Erin is not on call tonight, so she'll be with us for the whole chat. Yassine is a platform engineer who's done You Build It, You Run It at 3 different organisations. 2 of those are retail clients, and 1 is a large supermarket chain. So I'm really excited to have the opportunity to learn about their You Build It, You Run It experiences over the next hour. We are planning to take some audience questions towards the end of the conversation. So please do add your questions to the chat whenever you think of them using the Zoom Q&A function. And all of that said, I'm going to hand over to Steve, Yassine and Erin. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being with us. And if you're on call tonight, special hello to you. If you get paged in the next hour, it's okay. We're recording the session. It'll be available on YouTube. It's happened to all of us. You're in an important meeting or doing a thing you want to do and you get called out. It happens. Okay, so I know Yassine and Erin very well and think very highly of them both. And I thought that it would be good to hear a bit about the different experiences of You Build It, You Run It. One thing we talk about with our customers is with Equal Experts, you get a breadth of expertise as well as a depth of expertise. We work across a bunch of different industry sectors, a bunch of different countries, and we've seen a lot of different flavors of You Build It, You Run It. So why don't we start with something really obvious, which is for you, Erin. What benefits of You Build It, You Run It have you seen for your customers?
I think speed, speed to respond. I think the team I'm with right now, we've been on 24/7 since January, and our mean time to recover is about 11 minutes for an incident. So that's pretty good. And when I say speed, and efficiency, I'm talking about the speed at which you can understand and articulate a problem to people outside your team. And the speed to fix it. So you can, the people who are on call are empowered to push something to production if they know exactly what they need to fix. Or they can, if it's not serious, discuss it and still do that the following morning. So I think that's what customers are looking for, that you can fix something quickly. And it's because you've got the people who wrote the code looking after it overnight. And they've got all day to see these problems arise. So it's not like a middle of the night thing. I guess that's the other thing I want to say is You Build It, You Run It is not strictly like a 24/7 thing. It can just be daytime hours as well. And I would say that's where most of our incidents occur, sort of around daytime hours or maybe just before the workday or just after the workday's ended. I would say the 3 a.m. call out is not a typical scenario.
Yes, and I think that's because often incidents are triggered by a deployment. There'll be multiple causes. There's no such thing as a root cause, but they'll be triggered by a deployment. And one thing I think I've seen consistently is when you put developers in charge of their own deployments, they are really cautious about the times they do deployments. I think one of our public sector customers, we kind of handed over the keys to developers thinking, what are they going to do on Fridays? And then we looked at the data and consistently Friday deployments either happened at 9 a.m. or they just did not happen. Every team did 9 a.m. at the very latest in the day. They were being so careful because they knew that they would be responsible for any consequences themselves. Yes, and what do you think? Have you also seen speed to response as the main benefit that customers have received. Anything else that you've experienced?
Yeah, everything what Evan said is what I agree with that. But also you get better visibility. You have better metrics to see how customers are interacting with your product. So you can then better sort of trade off features and, other concerns like, there's an incident that happened that needs to be put above a feature that you're developing. So you better understand how customers are using your product. You have more metrics, you have more visibility. So overall, you're building a better product as well. And like you say, you get those features out a lot quicker as well.
Yeah, I think that one thing we don't really talk about is often it really encourages you to think about outcomes rather than outputs, because you're responsible for the end-to-end process, right? You're not just building a thing and kind of chucking it over the wall. I remember before I used to do You Build It, You Run It, and there'd be like you wouldn't even know when there was an incident, right? Like someone might tell a few days later in the pub or something, oh, we had an outage over there. You're like, oh, really? I don't know. I'm working on next month's features or something. The disconnect between what you built and what was run, and there's just no feedback loop, right, from customers. You don't really get to understand what customers like and dislike about the product.
Yeah, you don't learn trends. You just don't know the product as well, really. You don't learn trends. You don't know, when there's more traffic on your product, what days, you don't have enough metrics to see, how things are getting processed on your application, what cards are people using, or what device are people using the application with, all of that's kind of gone. You kind of do your thing, like you say, throw it over the wall, and you move on to the next thing. And then there's some regression testing and everything that happens, and someone comes back and says, hey, there's this bug, and you quickly fix it, and then it's over the wall again. So you lose all of that good, those feedbacks that you get on each stage of your pipeline. You get to production, and before production it kind of stops, and you just throw over the wall and you move on to the next thing.
Yeah, and you end up with quite confrontational relationships, don't you? Not because someone is like a bad person or a Bond villain or something, like I'm going to really ruin Yasin's day by not approving this change request, but just because they don't understand the urgency or even just the importance of what it is you want to do. Like, it's quite hard to maintain a positive relationship with someone who's on a team with just completely different incentives and just doesn't understand how important your changes are to your customers, because they've got a completely different set of priorities given to them by somebody else.
Yeah, exactly. You're sorry.
I was just saying they also might not understand your options, because I think we do have to work with ops run it teams too, and sometimes they'll come to us and say, we think your last release is causing a problem, or we think your service is causing a problem. Can you roll back? Can you roll back? Can you roll back? And it's like, well, okay, let me look at it. Actually, we're going to do something, we're going to push something forward rather than roll back. It's not serious enough to roll a whole release back. I don't think those conversations are confrontational. I think they're really enlightening for both teams. I think they're positive, generally speaking, because you end up, I guess, educating them a bit about what your service can and can't do. But equally, the teams who are ops run it teams, they do know, a lot of them are really intimately aware of what, their big monolith that they're looking after does. So I usually find those interactions pretty rewarding, because I learned something about their world.
Yeah, and they have a lot of experience, ops teams as well. So whenever you are implementing You Build It, You Run It, and you do have an ops team in your organization, they have a lot of knowledge. So it's good to build those relationships and have those conversations.
Yeah,
because they have been doing this for a long time.
Yeah, well, that's one thing we really encourage, don't we? I think when we talk about You Build It, You Run It with our customers, we really stress that it's a hybrid model. Our goal isn't to get rid of operations teams. I think that's nonsensical, because they have so much innate knowledge about, really critical foundational systems. The idea is to stop overloading an ops team with stuff. One of our customers, I think, by the point the ops team was running like 20 different services, someone said, there's another 10 coming, and the ops manager, to their credit, was like, I can't do this. I can't keep taking on more stuff. I've got 3 people and they're overworked. I can't, keep doing this. And one of my pet theories about You Build It, You Run It is the challenges that dev teams face most of the answers the ops team already have. I mean, we'll talk about in a little while about how to like sustain a rota, but often when a bunch of devs like, there's only 3 of us, how do we manage a rota? The temptation was to say, go talk to that 2-person ops team and they'll have some ideas. Oh, and by the way, you need to find some more people. But before we talk about that, it's easy to talk about the benefits of you building Uranic for our customers, but I was also curious, you know, what benefits have you experienced personally? I mean, for me, for example, the first time I did On Call, I remember I was already doing TDD, doing continuous integration, doing some production monitoring, but I was more careful. I did find myself thinking, this could be something that wakes me up. I've got to be sure about the changes I'm making here. So I just have a bit more diligence around it. Like, Erin, how do you think it's changed the way that you work for the better?
I am told by my team that they're impressed by how well they think I understand what they've built. I'm not an engineer. I didn't go near science, okay, or maths in my education. And so I'm actually quite proud of that. It's a bit silly when people say I'm not a technical DL, whatever. It's like, but I can understand enough about the services that my team is building, and my team is not building a pretty set of web pages or an app that humans are using. My team is building this crazy backend set of processes, and so I feel I've grown a lot as a delivery lead from the experience, and I think it's nothing to be afraid of. It's exciting, and I know that there have been times when an ops team has come to us and said, we think there's something going on with your service, and we've looked into it and said, actually, it's this other team over here. Come over here and have this conversation. Let's fix this together. So I love the collaboration.
What about you, Yasin?
I think for me, you've got the people with the most context trying to resolve the issues, which kind of leads to lower sort of recovery time. As a platform engineer, I don't want to be on support for services running on my platform because I don't understand them well. I don't want to be looking at maybe their runbooks that are 6 months old and trying to resolve their issues. So I'm focusing on stuff that my team has built, stuff that I'm working on. And it just gives me more confidence to support the platform. But there's also things like when you're going to be supporting your product, there's more of a focus on operability and the reliability of the application, things like telemetry, login, metrics, alerting, there's, you have post-incident reviews, to make sure things don't happen, or to figure out why things have happened and make sure they don't happen again. Issues are prioritized and quickly implemented. There's the documentation has been better for when I've been in teams that have done you build it, you run it. It's a sense of ownership as well. I feel like you spoke about earlier, like you don't want to deploy on a Friday because you don't want to wake your colleague up, or you don't want to wake something up yourself. And we've always been empowered as well on a you build it, you run it team to make changes. So if the if the methods are not working, we're empowered to put forward our ideas and make changes to the process.
Yeah, I think you enjoy your work more when you feel like you own the thing, when you feel like you can, make a really meaningful contribution to it. And how you run a thing, it's such a huge part of it, way more so than like how you build it. It's a really, really a big deal. And it's for much longer than the actual development time, right? So I definitely got a lot out of learning what customers actually did with the thing that we were building, because often you just, even if it's an API or backend systems, they're saying like you learn so much from like real world usage of the thing that's completely blows away your assumptions. Yeah. And yeah, I guess if you've got a really curious mind, then you build your Uranic house. There's lots, because there's so many more skills you can learn, right?
Yeah. When you mentioned the monitoring and observability, I mean, I never thought I'd be the kind of person that would like log on in the morning and like look at these dashboards and you look at Grafana and be, oh, we went up to 6 pods. Like, oh, wow, that's, I mean, but I do, like, and I talk in stand up, I'll say, so what do you think? Oh, wow, the mobile apps got us up to 200 requests per second. That's more than we thought, the business peak would be. I never thought I would be interested in that stuff, but it is fascinating. And
Yeah,
that's
close to the actual business usage.
Yeah.
Scenarios. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah, I think we don't really write it down anyway, but we talk about monitoring as end-to-end testing for grown-ups, like production monitoring. If it's done well, and again, if the developers can build their own dashboards, it makes a huge difference. Then you can learn so much from like the live running system. And then when you actually come to debug a thing, you can actually, look at the live traffic, try to understand, figure out some hypotheses, and then go back to your tests. It's just a whole different world. But one thing that's kind of hard to get across, I think, to folks who haven't tried Uranic before is that it really does vary between companies. And I think that's where like the breadth of expertise we have at EE is super useful, because, we don't just do a thing on one company and say, yes, that's going to work everywhere. So the easy example I always give around Uranic is when I worked at HMRC a few years ago, some services there, the traffic was very much like in the daytime, it was up here, and at nighttime, it was absolutely flat. There would be 0 users at night. So some HMRC services simply didn't need out of hours on call, right? There was famously one service whose runbook said, if you are reading this between 11 p.m. and 8 a.m., it's okay. Look at this dashboard, which will show you there's no one using me. I'm fine, don't worry. Of course, there were some other services at HMRC that said, if you're reading this, there's a problem, here's a person to phone. But there was that difference, right? Whereas if you work in the private sector, maybe at retail like you folks currently are, there's demand at night. There are people still wanting to buy stuff at night, so you do need people on out of hours. So one easy example I've given to folks before is, in some public sector companies, you build it, you run it as daytime only, and then there's no need for any on-call at night. But then obviously in the private sector, you do need on-call 24/7. What am I asking? Like, what are the differences have you folks seen? When you work at different companies, what variants have you seen of you build it, you run it?
Well, I guess one I mentioned before is like, is the environment you're working in, are you going to be, is it a hybrid? Are you going to be working with some ops run it teams or not? Because they might have some different processes or tools, and those might need to have some kind of integration. I guess another one is like, are there like a lot of third parties that your journeys, or depending on your services in your organization, but then maybe some third party services. So one of my teams had a third party identity provider. So we had to know how to raise cases with them and understand their SLA and kind of know how to hack the ticket so that we would get the response that we needed. And another difference is what's the tolerance for this a degraded service? So would you just shutter the service if something looks like it's a bit off, or will you just let it maybe play out a little bit and have a slightly degraded experience, knowing it might recover before you would think about taking it down? Those are the things that come to mind for me.
What about you, Yasin?
Yeah, all of those things as well, like Erin said, but also things like rota management. I think, Steve, you and I worked at a client where we passed around a black bat phone,
The bat phone. I miss the days of the bat phone.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's a little bit difficult now. But the way we did, incident management tools were different. The way you do escalation policies and, how you escalate things were different. So even with the client I'm in now, each service is doing escalations differently. Some have a best endeavors sort of rota as well, and some don't. Some give the engineer a lot more time to answer the call, and others don't. Even the onboarding process for getting an engineer that's joined the team or wants to start doing on call differs. You know, some have shadow on call, some do on call during the daytime, and then once they've done that long enough, they're put in out of hours. So
I mean, I really missed the bat phone because I enjoyed the physical token. I enjoyed the whole who's on call instant. Well, if you're holding the bat phone, you're on call, and everyone will be joking, you know, trying to palm it off and slip it in someone else's coat or something. But it was also simpler, right? You didn't have to know everyone's phone numbers. You didn't have to have the app installed on everyone's phone. But I think those days are gone now. And also, I don't think PagerDuty was so wild about us having the one license for 8 people as well, to be fair to them. I mean, PagerDuty is a great product, but yeah, maybe we should have paid for 8 licenses there, not one.
Well, what was also nice as well, that before we did the handover, we used to have a quick 5-minute discussion to say what's happened during the day, you know, any deployments gone out, anything we should be aware of. And that sometimes differs as well. So, you know, I've been in teams that they don't do that.
Yeah, well, that's team dynamics, isn't it, Erin? That depends on how a team manages the stand-up, the heartbeat. You know, if your team has a live traffic, I'd assume the stand-up would start with anything unusual happening right now. Yeah. Before you get into how many story points do we think we're going to do? I'm sorry, Erin, I know you don't ask.
We don't do story points. No, we always talk about overnight. Has anything strange happened? Or how about that app's push notification? You know, who knew that skincare line was so incredibly popular? You know. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about the rota and managing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, you do it very differently, don't you? Because I know when Yas and I've worked on teams before, it's been you rotate a weekly. So if there were 4 people on the team, you'd each do 1 week of the month, and there'd be some horse trading. I remember Yasin trading pretty hard to make sure he was on call over Christmas one year. And I didn't realize one that I found out afterwards. It was like extra money to do Christmas. I was like, oh, I should have looked into that. And there were no call outs, right? Because it was such a stable service. It was like, oh.
Okay, so I do think you build it, you run it, you will have fewer incidents. But I was just looking at PagerDuty yesterday, and I just discovered that there's a section in there in the reports that tells you like how many. It's a report by user, tells you how many hours the people in your rota have been on call for. And I never saw this until just the other day. And so it was like obvious who was going to be in my team. Everyone guessed who was number 1. And then one of the other guys was like, I don't have enough hours in my lifetime to catch up to that person. It was just a funny thing about being on call. And I think that being on a support rota does kind of draw the team closer together, and there's some bonding there. People get nervous about it, but they end up, it's also comedy,
And there's also the bond of owning something live, right? Which often developers don't get an opportunity to. I've met people before who've done 12 years of development and they've never owned a live service. They've always just handed stuff over. So they've never had that experience. One of our colleagues, Alan, once said, the greatest gift you can give to a developer is to give them a live service, which is kind of sweet and odd at the same time, because it's just such a different experience to actually think about, users actually using this thing. All of my context-free assumptions about it go out of the window once it actually hits the road and it gets used. But yeah, your current team, am I right in saying that the rota changes daily? Is that right?
Yeah, it does. So, I mean, I was just thinking about the teams that I've been with where we've done this before, and they've ranged, the sizes have ranged. So from like sort of 4 people on a rota to 8 people. So obviously the more people you have, the less frequent you come up on the rota. And my current team also are comprised of like 4 different organizations. So there's some people from the client, and there's 3 other suppliers involved. So it's not just equal experts, and they're across 3 time zones. So at first glance, I was like, this is going to be impossible. How am I going to put this rota together? And then I just said, no, it stopped thinking about these things. The team said, I mean, I have found that it's a similar process to go to set this thing up, regardless of the team. And it's like the first thing you do is you decide what are the on-call responsibilities, and that can be the daytime responsibilities and the overnight responsibilities. And you agree that what those are. You make sure you have your run books and your dashboards and what alerts you want to configure. You make sure you understand what the incident management process is and the tools that you need to use. And as a team, you decide what is a shift? What does a shift look like for your team? And so it could be a week, like Yasin's team, or 24 hours, like my team, or anything in between. You can split the day and the night or whatever. And then you configure all that in PagerDuty. So I mean, I've done that more than once with different teams. And the time zone thing, we just said, look, your shift is 24 hours, and that 24 hours was actually set in the UK time zone. So it was 9 a.m. to 9 a.m. the next day. And your out of hours was just from whenever you logged off in your time zone. And so if someone in India, for example, logged off at 2 p.m. in the UK, and they got called out at 4 p.m. in the UK, technically they should be the responder, but more than likely the UK team members would say, it's all right, go have your dinner.
Yeah.
We got this. So it's the team hashing those things out.
Yeah, that's a sign of a healthy team if people are covering for each other. There was one time I was on call, I got called at 11 at night, and by the time I reached for my phone, it had been resolved because Yasin was out with friends somewhere, I seem to remember, had the same PagerDuty app on his phone, looked at the alert and was like, resolved it, said, it's fine. And I was like, wow, that's a fast response time. I didn't have to do anything. But yeah, I mean, when we talk about out of hours versus in hours, one thing often that doesn't get covered, not everyone can do on call out of hours. People might have some really good personal reasons to not do it. They might have a young family, they might have health reasons why they can't do it. And I think that, I mean, I don't know, I'll be interested in what you two think, but I think that as long as, if every team member's signing up to do on-call in hours, and then there's 3 or 4 that can do it out of hours too, I think that's kind of okay. I think the main thing for me is that there's enough safety in the team, psychological safety in the team, that someone can actually say, folks, do you know what? I can't do out of hours for a couple of months because I've just got this health thing that I don't want to talk about. I will do out of hours when I can, as long as people are stuff in hours, I think that's the main thing, right?
Yeah, I think you need flexibility. You need to be able to, not do on call, change a shift, get someone to cover you for a few hours. And then you also need things like an escalation as well. If something, something's happening, you can't answer a call, at least there's an escalation policy, or your service owner will get called out and they'll figure something out, because you just can't get to the phone because it's an emergency. So like you say, you got to build those safeties around your on-call process. So engineers are more confident when they go on call. They don't have this sense of fear or sense of like foreboding where something's going to go wrong.
And again, these are things that if you're unsure as a dev team how to get this stuff started, your ops team will have this figured out. They'll already have people covering for each other, doing different hours, swapping rotors on short notice. They will have got that experience of forming together as a team and figuring that stuff out. They're a fountain of knowledge that developers are often reluctant to go and speak with, unfortunately. But
I mean, these things always happen with, it's COVID also, someone on call tests positive and they're not feeling well. It's like, well, someone just takes the rest of their shift and, and they're off the rota till they feel better. It's really not a big deal.
I didn't think about that. I've not done on-call since the pandemic started, but yes, that's a great example. Someone might just say, on a night's notice, I've tested positive, I'm feeling rubbish, can someone else just handle it for me? And I think they will. So there's a good reason to not do you run it out of hours, which is you just can't. There's a complicated life thing that means you can't do it. I think we've all seen situations though where developers haven't done you run it before and they are reluctant to do it. So across Equal Experts, we have a lot of people who review built you run experience. We do it with a lot of our customers, and yet we work with customers and we try to upskill employees and empower them to take on more responsibilities. And sometimes employee developers can be a little reluctant to do you run it for a first time. And what kind of reasons have you heard where developers are a bit like, oh, I'm not really sure that I want to do this? Erin, do you want to go first?
I think that if you are looking after services that maybe you didn't build, maybe you inherited them recently and haven't had a chance to get those run books up to scratch, or haven't had much experience with the alerts on those services, that I mean, I would feel reluctant about that personally. I think there's also the perception that the middle of the night call out is like your typical you run it experience. I mean, it can happen, but it's not typical. I think the things that you find that would call you out are things that you're likely to encounter during your workday, or just before, or just after your workday ends. And I think the personal time is a big one. Like, and it's an unknown. I guess if you haven't been on call before, you just don't know how you're going to respond.
Yeah.
In the moment.
Yeah, it's the fear of the unknown. It's that I'm going to get called out frequently, and I'm going to get called out for stuff that I can't resolve, that it's out of my control. And I know that when I found people before that have been a little reluctant, I make sure to slide in front of them the latest statistics for their service, and I'm like, there's been 0 call outs for 6 months, and the last call out 7 months ago was resolved in 5 minutes. Like, what's in the data that you're worried about? There's definitely this, the fear of an unfounded fear of this is going to happen all the time. I mean, the disruption on standby is different to disruption from call-outs, but I think that fear of call-out disruption, that can go away pretty quick. I mean, Yasin, when was the last time you got called out? You're on call, what, once a month? 1 week every month now, I think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to, with the team I've just joined, I'm going to be going on call soon. But previously, I mean, I haven't been called out that often, really, a handful of times, and I've been on call out for a lot of days.
You need to check your PagerDuty metrics.
Yeah, man, PagerDuty. I hate all tools equally, but I do have this thing that I do really like PagerDuty. It just works. It's so nice. The APIs are a bit fiddly, but which I know a lot about. But it's a great tool. And I mean, if there's one thing I said you would need for you build it, you run it, I think I would say, can we have PagerDuty, please? And influence over the alerts. Because a big thing we've seen before, Yasin, I know, is that the developers need to be able to control the alerts, right? Need to be able to configure them, tune the thresholds, create alerts, delete alerts. I mean, we worked at one place where we started with 14 alerts, and we narrowed it down to 2 or 3, I think, in the end, because those were the really actionable alerts. The rest were just almost symptoms.
Yeah.
And if they fired, the 2 or 3 core alerts would fire. But whittling that down, iterating on it was a great experience, I thought.
Yeah, if you have like noisy or unactionable alerts, it just increases complacency, it puts engineers off doing on call, it increases alert fatigue, and it's even things like, if you don't keep your run books up to date, or there was sometimes lack of visibility as well. I remember in PagerDuty, we had to run a ticket where we wanted links to the Kibana there. We wanted links to Alert Manager. We wanted all those links there. And so we ran a ticket so engineers didn't have to, go out and have to make sure they've saved the link or anything. All the information was there. So it's just basically making that experience a little bit easier. Also setting expectations for your SLAs and stuff, if you've got, speak to your team, how long do you have before you need to acknowledge? If you've got 15 minutes, you can then plan your day better. Actually, I can run to Tesco, which is 5 minutes away, and I'll be back. But if you need to acknowledge within 5 minutes, it's a completely different situation. So it's having those expectations clearly laid out before you go on call.
So if we talk about, there's obviously the one big reason that developers often don't want to do it. I'm just checking if there's a question on this one topic, and to my amazement, there isn't. So the one thing we've all consistently heard at different companies is, I don't want to do it because A, it's not paid standby, or B, it's not paid enough on standby. And I mean, we talked a moment ago about fear of call out disruption, which, you can look at the data and say, well, you're only called out once in the blue moon, so don't worry about that. But obviously there's standby disruption, right? If you're on call, you do change your life. You don't go out. Well, no one goes to nightclubs anymore. That's a bad example.
But like going camping, one of my teams is like,
yeah.
I'm going camping. There's no internet. I can't bring my laptop. Who's going to take this shift for me? You know?
Thank you for a pandemic example. Yes, kids go camping, not to nightclubs in 2022. That's a good example.
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of cycling, and you know that, Stephen. You know, it's if I have to do on call that weekend, it means that I'm missing out. You know, there's no way I can.
There was a famous time many years ago, I think 2009, where I was on call and I went to the cinema with my wife, then girlfriend, and there was no reception in the cinema. There was an incident, of course. I think it was like a Saturday afternoon. I got called out, and on Monday morning it was, why didn't you answer the phone? And I said, I'm not paid to do standby, and I didn't know the cinema didn't have no phone reception, which in 2009 was far more common than it is today. But that kicked off a whole debate about whether people should be paid to do on call at that company. I remember being quite, I think everyone will be surprised. I was quite militant, and I was like, well, folks should be remunerated for the inconvenience. You know, so what have you found? Have you found that folks are kind of reluctant to sign up unless there's some kind of fair compensation?
Yeah, I found that, and I think sometimes with different suppliers as well, there's different rates and things, and I think that's been disruptive as well. And some, you could be an engineer on a team, and your colleague that's from a different line or that's part of the organization is getting paid very, very little compared to what you're getting paid, and they're like, no, I'm not going to do it because it's just as disruptive to my life.
Yeah, that's really difficult, isn't it? And also because we really pride ourselves on transparency around EE, we don't, we are, we try to have those conversations in the open with employees of a customer organization or co-workers from another supplier who we enjoy working with. And those kind of conversations can be difficult because people don't like talking about extrinsic motivations. And there's no right number here as well. And now you build at Uranic playbook. We have a whole section on here's the kind of remuneration models that we recommend. One is if I remember rightly, it's standby pay only. The other one is standby and call out. But I remember us writing the playbook, we don't recommend a number because that's impossible. I think there's a member of the Equal Experts Network, Spike Lindsay, who did an on-call compensation survey, I think in 2019. It's still online somewhere, and just the disparity in what different companies were paying was astonishing. That I was really surprised. One company that's done quite a bit publicly is Monzo. Have talked about how they just pay a flat rate per week, but they're quite open about how they've set it up, how it works. They have a whole bunch of people signing up to it. But it is tricky, right? Because often companies in the past have paid one ops person a low amount of money to be on call on standby at night. And now somebody like me turns up and it's like, well, you've got 40 teams. That means you're going to need maybe 5 people on call for those services from those 40 teams. They're going to want this amount of money each night. And then the paymaster is kind of like, well, hang on, I used to pay one person. Now you want me to pay 5 people. What gives? So there's a really tricky conversation there about the financial exposure versus the remuneration, the risk and reward of paying people. It can be really tricky.
Yeah, it's a difficult one as well. And sometimes throwing more money doesn't mean you're creating a better experience. There's still loads of things that if you got blamed for post-incident reviews, if you're burning out your engineers, you can throw as much money as you want. That's not going to fix your problem. So it's really creating that safe. It's part of. It's one of the things that you put as part of creating that safety around on-call. It's
there's a work-life balance thing there. I think, Erin, I'm sure you'll have a perspective on this. We've got a great comment in the chat from Melinda Marsh, who said it's not just about fair compensation, it's about like people feeling like their work-life balance is being respected by upper management.
Yeah.
Is that something?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why I make it clear to my teams that they own, deciding what a shift looks like. And so, I mean, I think it's strange that you would do a week, because I think that my team members are like, oh, I just get to that 24 hours. And then, I don't have that again for a few days or whatever. So I think they like that quick sort of, do a shift, and then, you know, you don't have to do that for a little bit. And I think we also tried to make it so that the rota, you never are doing the same day every week. So everyone has a go at every day of the week. And so someone's always going to have, a different person's always going to have a Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday, a bank holiday, Christmas, you know, whatever. So just keeping it a mix, I guess. But yeah, you have to have the compensation there. I mean, one of my developers is incredibly grumpy guy who hates being on call. He's like, oh, I just don't like this. But you know, at least there's that lovely money, you know, and maybe nothing will happen, you know. So
right, we need to pause the live call now while I try to think in my head who that grumpy person could be. Erin's team. I was thinking, is this me? Am I on Erin's team and not knowing it? Why would you be grumpy when Erin's team? Erin's delightful. All right, well, we'll have to hunt down that person afterwards. Okay. They'll have to flee the country. So, yeah, I mean, the remuneration thing is hard as well, because, you know, we can offer advice to a customer. Ultimately, it's their choice. You know, I remember at one company really going into bat for the employees and thinking, this is probably as far as I can go as a consultant. I went beyond. I really suggest you consider paying your engineers more. I think I went as far as you need to do this, which was not advice anymore, it was a command, which I was quite uncomfortable with. But there were multiple employees lurking in the shadows like, Steve, we really need someone to say something here, because our manager don't kind of get this. I remember one senior manager at that company actually said to me, why would I pay for this? Like, this is expensive. And I remember thinking, compared to what? Like, it's expensive compared to doing nothing. But if you do nothing and something goes wrong, then you will lose lots of money real fast. That is more than this small amount of money. It's a tricky one, and there's no one answer, unfortunately. Let's see, Julia is giving me the look of we should move to Q&A, because there are some great questions there, including from some people that I know, which is really exciting, and I should not prioritize them. So, because I'd be wrong. So how about we do an easy one first of all? So Phil Hargreaves, one for Erin probably. What advice would you give to a new DL moving into their first You Build It, You Run It role? That's a good question.
I guess maybe try to find out what they're worried about first. I maybe try to find someone in your network who's done it before. Maybe I ask people what it's like for their first time. I'm happy to have that conversation. Look at the You Build It, You Run It playbook. And I guess I actually had a conversation recently with another Equal Experts DL who was going to have to put a support rota together for the first time, and she was nervous, and she was PagerDuty and this and that and that, and I just talked to her and let her throw a bunch of questions, and she just went, oh, I'm not scared anymore. It's fine. It's actually under our control, and that's the main thing, is that it's the team. The team is empowered, or the team should be empowered, to decide what you run it means to them and what your support model looks like.
All right, cool. Right, now let's do one for Yasin, then I'll take one that I definitely want to answer. Okay, so let's see. Yasin, have you ever been in a situation where you've done you run anything you haven't built? There's a question here from Andy Nesling. How do you get a team comfortable with You Build It, You Run It when they haven't built the thing, but they're taking on responsibility for it and they'll be making changes for it in the future? Now that's relevant to your current customer, I think, Yasin, where there's a model of services moving between teams. Maybe not on your particular team, but I know it's a thing over there. So how would you advise a team get comfortable with Build It, Run It when they weren't actually the first people coding the thing?
I think one of the things you need to look at, you got to work with that team to really, I mean, if you have the opportunity to work with them, to look at their run book, be comfortable with it, you know, making sure that you understand it well enough, making sure they've covered all the points. There's other things that we've done as well in the past, where we've ran chaos days and, you know, broke systems, and, you know, looked for gaps in the documentation, and, you know, try to improve the process. We've tried to make some changes to the application as well to improve it. It's a continuous cycle of improvement, really. You really got to go back to those steps, understand the application well, do all there's a bunch of different things you can do to improve it. It's a difficult situation to be in, and it can lower the morale of your team, but it's, again, getting those feedback cycles in place, so you're slowly building up the confidence of the team, and, you know, as they're working through the application. It might be a little bit different if I doubt you're going to be supporting it straight away if you've not done any work on it. So I'm sure there's the time, like a handover time, where you have the ability, or you have the opportunity, sorry, to get comfortable with the product you're trying to support.
All right, cool. So have any of us done this? Of course, from Grant Crofton, some companies are quite strict in terms of who can do what, usually for regulatory reasons, e.g. segregation of duties, such as ensuring someone who writes code can't also deploy it, and minimizing the people who can access live systems and data. Are there any additional challenges introducing URanit in those environments? Yes, there are, Grant. First of all, you may be interested to know, if you didn't know, there is no place in ITIL or SOX or PCI DSS or COBIT or ITSM where it actually says you must have segregation of duties. That is not a thing that is prescribed. It is often a thing that is implemented in an astonishingly large number of companies, but it is not a thing that is laid down. I didn't know if you know, but that is a true fact. So how can it be done? It's not something we've got a lot of experience on EE that I'm familiar with, unless Yasin or Erin know about it. I do know a place that did it very well. A very small company called Etsy do this. And the way that they set it up is that they created an entirely different space within the organization. So there was the Etsy website space and the Etsy payment space. And you'd work in one of those two areas. If you worked in one of the two areas, you couldn't access the other area's systems, but you build it, you run it. So there was a segregation between the different business areas, but you still owned and ran the services themselves. Etsy have some conference talks about that, a couple of videos online about it. John Allspore was heavily involved in that. If my next customer is, I don't know, a healthcare company, and they want to do you run it, then that's how I would advise they do it. I'd say divide the company rather than divide the team, or dividing build and run. That's one way to do that. Yasin or Erin, have you actually worked at a place recently where there's been some kind of segregation of duties imposed for compliance reasons?
I've been lucky. The sort of organizations I've worked with, the teams.
Well, there's enough artificial segregation in our lives, isn't there? We don't actually need that. The actual here's a good reason for segregation. I mean, when you have an ops team, you know, that's a segregation of duties, right? It's just often one that's artificial and completely unnecessary. Okay, let's move on. How about maybe one for Erin. So from Rob Manock, from your experience, what proportion of a wider team should be dedicated to run it if you're responsible for building and running many services in the same space? That's a good question. What proportion of the team?
Well, if I look at the team that I've just been leading, and I said we had 8 people out of that team on the rota. So the people we didn't have on the support rota were the BAs, and I think that, and the front end dev, and that might have been a mix of like, I'm not comfortable, or I have personal reasons why I can't do overnight shifts. So, you know, that's nearly 100% of the team that was doing you run it. And I guess I wouldn't ever really think about splitting it by a percentage of the team. It's like whoever wants to get involved. If you're talking about like operability work versus new feature work, that's a different conversation. And I would say in my experience, my teams have a split of about, I would say 30% operability, 30 to 40% operability, 60 to 70% new development, new feature work. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, I think a couple of teams that Yas and I've worked on recently, there's a person on call during the day, and they just sit there, and they're we call them the reactive person. You know, other teams have different names for them, but that's the person who handles any incoming requests from other teams or from users. They handle any on call, they handle any BAU for the day. They deliberately only take on really small tasks that are going to actually be accomplished within a day. But that's one way that we've seen it handled, right? Yes. And have you seen any other ways of doing it?
That's us too. One person is the point person each day.
Okay, so one more question from Agatha. I hope I pronounced this right. Agatha Dab. And it's a question that we were thinking of covering today, but we were running out of time for. In a company I work at, You Build It is directed to be delivered only partially by our own people and the rest by third parties. What would be your 3 must-haves to prevent failure when you have a split between a build team and an ops team? So we're on a team tomorrow, we're coding a thing, and we have to chuck it over the wall to an ops team. What are the 3 top things we do to prevent failure? Well, all of my tricks don't work in pandemic land. I would just go out to lunch with people and get to know them on the ops team, first of all. That can't happen anymore, which is really rubbish. I don't know what we do in the pandemic equivalent, just hang out on Zoom a little bit, just try to get to know each other a bit and understand other people's priorities and incentives and what they're worried about. Try to just help them out sometimes. What about you folks? What would you do?
You still take pockets of the benefits that You Build It, You Run It gives you. So you still focus on your applications, operability, and the telemetry and things, and the run books. It's just someone else is going to be sort of looking at those things out of hours, but that still helps them a lot. And then you have those conversations with your ops teams, and try to settle their worries, and you point them to the right place and try and make them understand your application as best they can. So it's just trying to sort of improve that relationship a little bit.
I would give them an open invitation to any ceremonies like stand-ups, and sprint reviews, showcases, invite them to 3 Migos, any new features they're going to be supporting, things like that.
Yeah, well, we do that anyway with change management folks normally, don't we? One thing we would try to encourage change management folks to do is to, I don't want to use the phrase shift left, be proactively get involved in stuff like actually understand the features that are coming down the line, not just the things at the last minute, but say, hey, we're going to be doing this thing in about a month's time. It will be a normal change, not a standard change. It's going to have to go through a cab. It's going to have these dependencies. Like, how do you think we should handle it? And even if people choose not to attend to that conversation, the point is that you're inviting them into a space, and they're aware that there's a space where they can have a conversation, right? I think that's a real game changer if a dev team actually reaches out to the ops team and says, hey, we'd love you to be involved in this. If you don't come, then that's totally cool. It's their choice.
We've done that for, we were going to have like 8 different teams start using an API. And we invited the ops team to a conversation before each of those teams launched with us and said, okay, these are the use cases for this one. What are you worried about? And it kind of shut down all the concerns before we even turned it on.
Yeah, and it's also having those post-incident reviews with them and prioritizing those as well, because at the end of the day, just because you're not getting called out for them doesn't mean it doesn't matter. So it's, again, trying to improve that process or making sure those things don't happen again.
All right, so we've got one last question from Adam Coles, who I know from a distant past. Hello, Adam. So Adam's asking, can the model work when you are still forced down the project rather than product mode path, and projects must be handed over to support teams? Now, I think what Adam's referring to here is what's known in the public sector as a live service team. So in other words, the dev team does, you build it, you run it for a period of time, and then the service is handed over to a central team, maybe ops folks, maybe devs, who then take on loads of services, so that the original team can be freed up to work on the next thing. At one organization I worked at, that model resulted in one team of predominantly devs owning about 400 microservices, a number that I said at the time was excessive, but it happened. And that's the tricky thing. Like, once you create a barn door, You know, everyone just wants to shove everything they can inside the barn door, right? The trick is to not build a barn door in the first place. Have you folks seen that kind of model? It's not always known as a live service team. It can be known by other names. And it can just be, of course, that you build it, you run it for a while, and it's just still handed over to an ops team as well.
I mean, I guess that happens when the thing has all the features people think it needs, and that ops team maybe has had time to become intimately familiar with how it works, and they understand what the user experience is and what kind of errors the user might experience and why those things might happen. I mean, I guess you could.
I don't know. I've seen it go really badly, and I think there's this really big assumption. Whether you build it, you run it, or have an ops team or whatever, this idea of maintenance mode, there's this assumption that users don't want more stuff. You know, that we've done our backlog we've done a backlog, we've run out of CapEx, whichever one it is.
I'm not saying I buy into this, but I'm saying you could do that.
I think it's really dangerous to assume that users don't want more stuff, because my experience is that users always want more stuff, and the triggers to find the stuff they actually need.
Mm-hmm.
And that means user research. And the moment you put a thing to maintenance mode, you're probably giving up on user research.
Yeah. And
saying, what you're kind of saying is, we're done talking to our users now, if we talk to them at all. Now we've made enough money on this thing. And I find also it's quite hard to unwind that. You know, the alternative that the three of us know about, of course, is that, you know, as you run out of funding for a you build it, you run it service, you know, you just shrink the number of teams slowly. You know, you consolidate. So, you know, your loyalty team, your rewards team, and your vouchers team, they just become a single loyalty team or something, you know, and they own the free services. Because the advantage of that is that you can expand later on if you find more funding, right? It's easier to, you know, you can have dev teams expand the contract much more easily than a dev team hand over to an ops team and then hand it back. That just doesn't happen.
Yeah, we have something similar with the client, Erin and I. We have like domain teams, and that might change as well in terms of peak traffic, or, you know, when things are more business critical.
Yeah, like the Log4Shell thing, right? Imagine when Log4Shell happened, all of those poor ops teams, that team that we know of, that live service team, where they've got 400 microservices to patch a Log4j on, like that's unwise. You know, the exposure there is significant. It's going to take them time to do that.
Yeah.
But okay, we've got 1 minute left. Julia's going to cut me off in a moment.
I'm poised, ready to say thank you.
What do you think, Julia? Is there anything we haven't covered? What have your experiences of Uranic been like?
Well, my experiences are from quite a long time ago, and I was interested in your question about restrictive access, because I remember days of being on the phone to someone and saying, you have to click this button and do this and restart this server, and you end up with the person who knows what they're doing can't actually get the job done.
I had that once. 2008, I was called out, and I was in a restaurant somewhere in Finsbury Park, and I was like really loud on the phone, like, no, you have to press this one button on the server, and everyone in the restaurant's staring at me. I was like, this is going really well.
Hopefully, thank you everyone who's joined the call, and you will have learnt some tips and techniques for avoiding scenarios like that in the future. You build it, you run it doesn't have to be difficult, I think, is my big takeaway anyway.
Yeah, there's a lot of benefits to it, but thank you to Yasin and Erin. They're the real stars with the real life current experiences. I'm just the furniture.
So yeah, thank you, Yasin and Erin, for sharing your expertise. And thank you, Steve, for giving them such great prompts to do so. And thank you, everyone who joined us, and for your fantastic questions. Please join us for the next expert talk, which is coming up soon.
And will be announced on our website and on our Twitter feed, I presume, Erin? Julia, excuse me?
There we go.
There's a slide and everything.
And there's a slide. It will be announced on our website and our Twitter feed, and it's Wednesday, the 8th of the 6th.